Should voting be mandatory? It is my view that voting should be mandatory. Not because high voter turnout has been known to benefit the political parties that I support, although there is something to be said about that. I support mandatory voting for a number of reasons. Mandatory voting makes political representation more accurate. If everybody votes, political representation will more accurately represent the political will of the people. This is a desirable goal, because accurate representation of the people's views is a crucial component of democratic government. Mandatory voting provides the government with greater democratic legitimacy by requiring it to possess the support of a larger portion of the population. Mandatory voting encourages people to participate in their society and the big decisions that define it. Mandatory voting encourages people to partake in a civil ritual that plays an important role in a sense of belonging and societal inclusion and empowerment. Mandatory voting encourages political engagement. People should be encouraged to question authority. People should be encouraged to think about politics. People should be encouraged to scrutinize their leaders. Mandatory voting encourages such desirable things. Mandatory voting ensures that the politically marginalized have a voice. Mandatory voting eliminates informal voter disenfranchisement. Mandatory voting guarantees a high voter turnout and discourages apathy and indifference. There are many good reasons to support mandatory voting. Some allege that not voting can also be a form of political expression. The vast majority of the time, not voting is not a form of political expression in any serious sense. Most of the time, not voting is a display of apolitical sentiments, something to be combated. Apolitical sentiments should be minimized. They undermine democracy because democracy requires political participation. Apolitical sentiments prevent governments from being held accountable by the people and leave the powerful unregulated and unquestioned. Few things are more dangerous than this. Combating apolitical sentiments is significantly more important than allowing for a marginal right to express one's politics by not voting. And still, if one wishes to refuse to vote in protest, one can still do so. One will just face legal penalties for doing so. In some respects, this makes the refusal to vote an even more meaningful political statement. If one dislikes the options, being mandated to vote may encourage disillusioned voters to create new options, providing voters more choices and enriching the democracy. If one despises their voting options, one can still express their disdain. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press will remain. Some allege that mandatory voting makes voting less meaningful. Yet this policy exists precisely because voting and the democratic process is so meaningful. None should be deprived of participation in such a process by their own foolishness. That we let people foolishly deprive themselves of this meaningful participation is evidence that we do not regard it as meaningful enough. The creation of law is itself a meaningful process, and by making voting mandatory, we recognize how meaningful this practice is. And the mandatory does not lose its meaning. Many bad things are prohibited, but to do no evil is no less meaningful. And we would never permit any other evil simply for the sake of giving greater meaning to those who do not commit it. Mandatory voting takes no meaning away from voting. Just because not voting is illegal does not mean we only vote because not doing so is illegal. This would be as absurd as suggesting that the only reason we do not murder is because murder is illegal. Mandating voting does not remove any of the meaningful non-legal reasons to vote. To the contrary, it represents the recognition of those reasons. That is precisely why it is mandated, because there are good reasons in favour of such conduct that justify such a mandate. In our time, one group is deprived of political representation. the apolitical, the non-voter. This is the ultimate marginalized group as far as politics is concerned. This is the unseen group, the forgotten group, and it is this way by its nature. This hole in our democracy must be done away with, and the solution is to mandate the vote.